Good morning, everyone. I want to speak to all my fellow St. Lucians this morning. Today, I address you not just to speak out, but to speak up for truth, for transparency, and for the institutions of this country that have been sidelined, disrespected, and lied to by the very government sworn to serve and protect them. Almost 1 year ago, in April of 2024, this Labour Party administration broke ground on what was supposed to be the halls of justice. It was supposed to be a symbol of law and order, a beacon of democratic progress. But from the very beginning, United Workers' Party raised serious concerns. Not for political gain, but because we saw the red flags waving in plain sight. Concerns that had they been heeded would have saved taxpayers millions of wasted dollars. Our first concern was the location. In 2018, United Workers' Party administration had already identified a site for modern halls of justice and police headquarters at the Upper Bridge Street in Castries. And let me remind us that these were two separate buildings that were adjacent to each other and would have been connected by an underground tunnel. So the custody suites was intended to be underground, under the police headquarters, and there would have been a tunnel from custody suites to the court, which would have been in keeping with the modern practices of security. The designs were complete and the cost was reasonable, was estimated at approximately 80 million EC dollars for both facilities. A new police headquarters and 6 courthouses, 3 intended to be used for criminal cases and 3 intended to be used for high court cases. But instead of continuing this forward-thinking project, the SLP decided to bulldoze ahead with their own plan, dropping it right in the middle of an already congested city center, with no consideration for parking, traffic, or for the people who live, work, and worship there. And let us remember, this is the same government that chose to give away our Castries port, cruise ship port, to GPH. And the intention is to expand the capacity for cruise ship berthing in Castries. I say that because you would have thought that there would have been a plan to beautify the town and to create greater opportunities for St. Lucians to own their own duty-free shops and to be able to take advantage of the cruise industry. What was most alarming about this unwise decision was the proximity to our iconic cathedral. The construction would have disrupted and possibly destroyed one of the most sacred spaces in our city. The church is over 100 years old. And we have to ask ourselves a simple question. Even if the government believed that there was not a potential for it to be impacted structurally, what happens if it would have been? Could we ever replace the significance of the building and the historic nature of that building? The construction would have disrupted and possibly destroyed our city center. But when asked, the government insisted there was consultation. I remember the press interviews on the day of the groundbreaking in April, and they insisted that they had DCA approval and that everyone had been consulted. Yet, It turns out that the Roman Catholic Church was never consulted. Not even once. This is not just an oversight. This is a gross disrespect. When eventually the prayer warriors agitated and the church was finally granted an audience with persons from the DCA, it was discovered at that meeting that the DCA never took into consideration and never undertook an environmental impact study. It was a shocking revelation. I can tell you there was silence in the room. And then when John Peters himself attempted to justify to the church that there was no need for an environmental impact study, I believe that it's at that point that everybody realized something was wrong. Then there was the issue of cost. The Pierre administration's version of the project came with an astonishing tag close to $300 million. A fact they attempted to hide. The Pierre administration has continued to try to tell us that the cost of the building is going to be $144 million. But once again, St. Lucians had to find out the truth outside of St. Lucia. And it was in an interview that the Guardian newspaper of Trinidad had with the developer that it was admitted that the cost of construction was $144 million, and that there would have been another $20 million for furbishing the building, and that the cost of financing was going to be another $150 million. So it means the cost of the project was going to be in excess of $300 million. And when that's translated to the lease that the government has given to the developer, it was going to cost the taxpayers of this country $16 a square foot for 12 years to pay for this project. We raised objections that this massive contract was awarded without any tendering and was handed to a Trinidadian contractor. I asked the question repeatedly, and I still ask it. If the government was transferring the land on Constitution Park that was originally housing the old courthouse, transferring that land to the developer for $1, and also the government simultaneously was signing a contract where they were going to lease the property for $16 a square foot. So it means that the developer had the opportunity to go to the bank and say, here is the land, and here is a lease. None of these things were things that the developer brought to the table. This is what the government of St. Lucia was provided. Why on earth would you have not offered that deal to one of our local contractors? Especially knowing that there was no conditions to the loan. This is money coming from the taxpayers of St. Lucia. And why should the businesses and the contractors of this country not have benefited from that same deal? And now, to make matters worse, after nearly a year of confusion, secrecy, and silence, what do we discover? Not through an official announcement, not through government transparency, but through a whistleblower who bravely called in to a popular radio program, the most monitored program. This patriotic St. Lucian made the eye-opening revelation last week that the Halls of Justice project was being relocated. Days after the revelation, despite desperate to save face, Both Richard Frederick and Prime Minister Philip Pierre publicly claimed in the media that no final decision had been made and that negotiations were still ongoing. But the truth was already in black and white and was published in the Gazette, the first one dated, I have it here. The first publication was made on the 17th of January 2025. Sorry, was made on February 3rd of 2025. The decision by the cabinet was made on the 17th day of January. The first publication was done on Monday, February 3rd, and the second publication was made on Monday, February 10th, a week later. What does that mean? It means as we speak, as of February 10th, after the second publication, the land became vested into the state. There's no negotiations. In fact, the way that this works is you can either negotiate up front and agree on a price, and if that's the case, the government should have been transparent and told us what price they've agreed with the owners of the land, Mr. Ajuda. Or the government can proceed to acquire the land, and a tribunal is appointed, an independent tribunal, to meet with the government and to meet with the owner to determine what the price of the land is. And we already have a fair idea of what that price is. Because the same Richard Frederick, when he was the Minister of Housing in a previous administration, sold the land in front of SNS, where the old Clark Cinema was, as well as the land in front of Fix for $1,000 a square foot. He reminded us when they had the demolition of the CDC buildings as to how valuable the land was. And he also used the number of $1,000 a square foot. The land acquisition, the declaration of acquisition of land in the Gazette, tells us that the land is 0.13 hectares, which means that it is 30,000 square feet. At $1,000 a square foot, we're talking about that the government of St. Lucia is going to have to pay Mr. Ajuda or the family $30 million or thereabout. Remember, the land was originally, the project was originally on the Constitution Park where the old courthouse was. And they transferred that land, which was even larger than this, twice the size of this, for $1. And so now the cost of this project is going to be increased by the acquisition price of $30 million. Whatever has been spent on mobilizing and designs for the old site and the construction that took place, the time that's been lost between April and now over 1 year, all the equipment is there. Somebody has to pay for all of that equipment. And there has to be a new design. And the fact is there's still probably more acquisitions to be done because this lot is half the size of what the old lot was. We also must ask a very simple layman's question. If in fact the old site was problematic because of the potential to destabilize the structure of the church, how can any one of us believe by moving it across the street, because remember it's where the Ministry of Education was, that that's going to solve the problem? It's the same distance. But more importantly, If there was no environmental impact done on the old site, but common sense told you it didn't make sense, I'm hoping on this instance that if they are to obtain the confidence of the public, that there has to be an environmental impact study, and that environmental impact study must be made public. Let's be clear. The original location was abandoned not because the government had a change of heart. It was abandoned only after strong objections from the two respected institutions, the Catholic Church and the Bar Association, who had been completely shut out of the process. These institutions matter, as all do. Their voices matter, but this SLP administration has made a habit of ignoring the voices they don't want to hear or are not saying what they want to hear. This is not just a failed project. This is a case study in deception, mismanagement, and disrespect. A government that gets it wrong once may be forgiven, but a government that gets it wrong more than repeatedly, and then we can say that they are insulting the intelligence of the people by pretending it never did. That is a government that cannot be trusted. That is a government that has betrayed the trust of oath it gave to the people of St. Lucia. We in United Workers' Party believe in development, in progress, and building a modern St. Lucia. But that development must be rooted in integrity, in consultation, and in respect for our people and institutions. I want to say at this point that this is not just about concrete and steel. This is about the very foundation of justice. You cannot build justice on a lie. Now, when persons are elected to office as an MP and then are invited to be in cabinet, one of the first things that they do is they take an oath. Let me remind all of us what that oath says. It says, "I do swear that I'll be faithful and bear true allegiance to St. Lucia. That as a minister of government of St. Lucia, I will discharge my duties and perform my functions honestly, to the best of my ability, faithfully in accordance with the law, and always in the interest of the sovereignty, integrity, solidarity, well-being, and prosperity of St. Lucia. And I will not directly or indirectly communicate or reveal the business of or proceedings of the cabinet on the nature of the contents of any document communicated to me as a member of the cabinet, or any matter coming to my knowledge in my capacity as a member of the cabinet, except as it may be required for the due discharge of my duties as a minister. So help me God." So help me God. I will discharge my duties and perform my functions honestly. And that oath is done by placing your right hand on a Bible. Now, I know when it comes to Minister Frederick, he may be able to do this with the greatest amount of ease. I may not truly understand the oath. But in this particular case, it's the Prime Minister, a man who, from what I understand, goes to church on a regular basis, a man who claims to have faith. And I want to remind the Prime Minister not only are you swearing to follow the Constitution of our country, but in this particular case, you're swearing it on a Bible in the face of God. And when you put your hand on that Bible and you deliberately betray that promise, it's called blasphemy. And that's a very serious allegation. I cannot in any way understate how disappointing and dangerous it is to have the leader of our nation to lie so blatantly to the people of St. Lucia. This is a moment that St. Lucians should never forget. We need to hold this government accountable, because justice does not begin in a building. It begins with honesty, transparency, and truth. Truth absolutely matters. And the people of St. Lucia should demand nothing less from this government. Thank you. I know that there may be some questions from the media. I don't know if you want me to allow Mr. Joseph to come up first to deal with his, or would you like me to stay up and answer questions on the Halt of Justice? Okay, I'll deal with the Halt of Justice first, and Mr. Joseph will come afterwards.
Good morning, Leader of the Opposition. We have five. Good morning, Mr. Leader of the Opposition. We have 5 questions that have been sent in by media viewing online. 3 of them are directed at you and 1 each to your colleagues. The first was, what caused the delay with the Halls of Justice which your administration had conceived, and at what stage were you with the preparation of that project?
We were in advanced discussions with NIC. So the funding was supposed to be coming through NIC, and the developer was going to be with NIPRO. We had provided them with the designs for the police headquarters, as well as the designs for the courts. If you recall, we had an incident where the custody suites were there and had to be demolished. And I want to make it very clear, so we're very transparent on this. When we wanted to demolish the building, and there was discussions, the National Trust was clearly not in favor of demolishing the building. And when we were taken to court after we'd attempted to demolish the building, we realized that the National Trust has a process to identify and protect historical buildings. And that process is simply, they must identify the building, send it to the Prime Minister's office, and it is gazetted as one of the historical buildings. The custody suites was never designated as a historical building. And so in the court matter, it was agreed that we would hold off on demolishing the building, attempt to incorporate the old custody suites as part of our building. But if in fact we could not, it was for the government to make the final decision. So those persons who want to say that we went into the middle of the night or on a Sunday morning to demolish the building, that's not true. There had been discussion. In fact, it had even gone to court. An initial injunction was put against preventing the government from demolishing the building. Even the court recognized that the National Trust had no legal authority, but the architects and engineers attempted to come up with a design, and they could not. Sadly for us, COVID came. And when COVID came, resources had to be reallocated to deal with issues that were more pertinent at the time to the public of St. Lucia. So much so that you see when the government won the election, they were able to move pretty quickly on the Groselet police station. Now, we had purchased the old printery from the Star, and the old Star building in Groselet had been acquired. And we were working with the owners of that building to rent the space to keep the printery. So instead of moving all of the equipment, we would keep it there. And we had also taken the police, and the police had agreed to move into that building. Because when you saw the conditions that the Groselet police were living in, it was deplorable. And so that was a temporary fix until we would have been able to get that other project, which had been on the books since 2000, I think it was like 8 or 9, that had been on the books to do. They moved very quickly and took the money, obviously, that had been allocated for the police headquarters under NIC and moved it in that different location. So unfortunately, the project did not start, but the designs were completed. The costings had been done, and it had reached, if not full approval from the NIPRO board, was very close to getting full approval from the NIPRO board.
Okay. Since you're on this site, you mentioned this site where the initial halls of justice and police headquarters was proposed under your administration. The custody suites project, which is being built at that site, is almost 1 year late. The PM claims that it has been delayed because the toilets broke during shipment. This excuse is strange given that toilets for prisons and jails are usually made of stainless steel. Do you believe this excuse?
I don't believe the excuse. And the fact is that we've been made to believe that it was 1 year late. This is a project that, remember, started off as $1.5 million. And the last time we got a number was $4.5 million. This is a project that started within 6 months. I mean, do you remember the Minister of Housing in particular giving stories as to how irresponsible we were in demolishing the building and that there was nowhere for the prisoners to go? Well, 4 years have gone by. And the temporary situation has worked. Do I believe the story that the policemen are arresting people and bringing them up, was it to the top of the morn, and letting them go from there? I don't believe that story. The fact is that this project is also shrouded in its own fair share of controversy. We've asked, who is the contractor? We know for a fact that the Finance Act would have required the contract, because once it's over, I think it is $900,000 or whatever, $500,000, it must go to the Public Tendering Board to be signed. That didn't happen. And here we are now, not 1 year late, I would say to you almost 3 years late, that we have no building, we have no idea who the contractor is, we have no idea how much it's being cost, but more importantly, it questions what the government's vision is. Because all we've done is just put in a building, what it looks like is a modern version of the old custody suites. And I want to say clearly what our intention was. That to build a modern police headquarters where all of the cameras that are around the island could have come into a safe room. I'm very concerned that the feed for all those cameras is going to the police training center, and that inappropriate security standards have been placed there. So this was to be a modern facility to manage our national security. When prisoners would have come from Bordelais, the van driving them would have gone underground and the gate closed. So it means when they were coming onto the bus and off of the bus in town, it would have been done in a secure manner. And in keeping with modern practices, in having a courthouse nearby, that you would now take those persons from custody suites underground, through a tunnel, and up to the court. Look what's going on opposite the VG field. Criminal cases taking place there. No proper barriers. Not a safe environment. The other thing is, when we considered putting all of the courthouses, because this new building they're proposing is 14 courthouses. And I've said to St. Lucians, not everybody understands plans or understands numbers. If you go to the Daher Mall and see the size of the Daher Mall, and it's not just the front, but it's the back, and pick up the Daher Mall and bring it down to that location and add one more floor, that is what we're talking about. 14 courthouses. And we've had instances here where people have called in on criminal cases and given bomb threats. I know such one person that didn't want the plane to leave and called and made a bomb threat. So imagine a bomb threat now in town. All the courthouses are closed. And should we have a family court next to a criminal court? My government said no. Absolutely not.
There appears to be some confusion on your statement that Constitution Park was sold for $1. Can you clarify this situation?
I've always known Constitution Park to be where the Printery is, where Parliament is, where the park itself was, and where the old courthouse used to be. And so when I made reference to $1 for Constitution Park, clearly I was not meaning the entire park. I was making reference to what the discussion was about. The discussion was about the location for the halls of justice at the bottom of Constitution Park. And they are separate block and parcel numbers. And the contract that we have, that we got from Trinidad, clearly states that the government was going to lease the land to the developer for $1. So instead of coming out and trying to be smart and to show people the land registry for where the Sir John's statue is, everybody knew that that's not what I was making reference to.
Switching to the budget, what are your initial thoughts on the presentation of the estimates of revenue and expenditure which were presented last evening?
I think that this budget is going to reveal to all St. Lucians the level of mismanagement that has taken place and the extortion that's taken place. We've seen unprecedented tax revenues. So if you go back to 2019, tax revenues totaled about $1.2 billion. And today we're talking about 1.5 or 1.6 billion dollars. And that increase in tax revenue has come specifically from excise tax. And I believe that once we see the economic and social review, that that's going to tell us that the bulk of the excise tax has come from two things. Come from by having a higher price on gas and therefore making more than the $4. And two, by reducing the amount of subsidy on cooking gas. So all governments have subsidized cooking gas. Let's put that as fact. What has varied is to the amount that we would subsidize it. This government has chosen to reduce the amount of subsidy, therefore it costs them less. So the combination of making more money on the excise tax for gas and having to spend less money on the subsidy for gas has earned this government a significant amount of money. Secondly, the Prime Minister admitted that the 2.5% levy that didn't exist before has generated about $40 million in extra revenue. And the new tax amendments that he's made, where he's increased the threshold of people having to pay tax, but that now has put a greater burden on the people who have remained to pay taxes. So I want us to get this straight. According to the numbers in the estimates, that he's making more today on income tax than he was before. And they have less people paying that. So the people who are paying are actually paying a greater proportion of their salaries. And I've met some of those people. And they are bawling. They are hurting with what this administration has done. There was a phrase that I used in the 2016 election. I talked about ching, ching, ching in your pocket. So when my government lowered the VAT rate, was to put the money in your pocket. When the government kept gas prices under a particular level, was to say we were not going to take and extort the people of this country to make tax revenues. And we made the tough decisions in governing this country so that we could continue to grow the economy and that people had disposable income in their pockets, because United Workers' Party absolutely believes that the individual person makes better decisions with money than government does. So this budget, the beginnings of it, and the numbers that were shown are frightening. To know how much money has been taken from the pockets of the individual people, and it begs the question, how are people surviving? And the callousness, the irresponsible understanding of how our economy works to allow the price of fuel, the price of electricity, the cost of bread, the cost of transportation to go up. All these things are extorting money from the people at the expense of the government. And we have to ask ourselves a simple question. This is a question that we can all answer. Do we think the roads are better today? Do we think our classrooms and our schools are better today? Do we think that there's been a significant improvement in the security of our country? Do we believe that we're getting better health care today for all that extra money that they're collecting? And if you don't, the question is, where is the money gone?
Final question to you. The health and security levy was supposed to end this year, but in the estimates which were presented by the PM last evening, it appears that the government is counting on collecting another $40 million from this levy over the next year. Does it mean that the tax is being extended, and what is your opinion on this?
Clearly, the government has declared that the tax is not going away. And you know, there was a presentation going around on national health, universal health. And in the first presentation that they did, not only did that document say that they were going to maintain the 2.5% levy, it said that they were going to increase VAT by another 2%. Right? So there's absolutely more taxes coming. As you know, started under our administration, there has been a waiver for paying property taxes. The government has made it very clear, and the IMF has made it very clear, that they're going to have to change that. So what we're seeing is, I think that this government will try to pass a budget proclaiming there's no new taxes, although we've been taxed at the highest level we've ever been taxed at. And we'll wait until the after election in hopes that they win, and they intend to increase the level of taxation in this country substantially. The IMF said a very important thing, that while they see that the country continues to recover, but the cost of doing business, well, not the cost of operating government, is increasing at a faster rate than revenue. So this government has shown no capacity to reduce cost. And let's just look at that for a second. They've stopped the HI airport, which has cost us money, millions and millions of dollars. Not only in terms of opportunity cost lost, but in terms of getting rid of contractors and all kinds of false allegations. St. Jude's Hospital, which they could have finished the new building, a brand new building, purposely built to be a hospital, for maximum another $100 million. They now have indicated to us in last budget they intend to spend $260 million on top of what was already being spent to salvage. So that's a waste of $150 million. We see what's going on with the roads. The Rodney Bay Road was supposed to cost $15 million to finish the whole thing. They've paid the contractor, because they terminated the contract prematurely, $22 million. And now my understanding is going to cost another $15 to $20 million to finish the road. When they suspended and terminated the contracts for Shock and for Tavern, they had to allow the developer, when they brought him back and admitted that he was doing nothing wrong, brought him back, and in order to recover his cost, is now increased the price for the land by square foot, by, is it $4 or $5 a square foot? More than what it was before. So again, that's being passed on to the individual consumers. People, young people, would have had access to land. I think it was under $10, and now it's close to $14 a square foot. All of these problems have cost us money. They turned around, they gave GPH a contract to get a concession, of which GPH is collecting on approximately $10 million US a year. 10 million US a year. Over 40 years, over $400 million US that's been given away. The CIP, we've seen that the contract was amended for CIP, and Galaxy is made off with over $1 billion US of our money, including the commissions. We were supposed to collect $150 million US to go into the CIP unit, and that money was given to Galaxy. So I want to say that this budget has revealed that the government, true to form, Labour Party, taxes. And then even after they've obtained this money, which will be short-lived. Now, the assumption the Prime Minister repeated last night in his speech is that he's expecting to see a 6% increase in tax revenues based on improved efficiencies of tax collection, and that the economy is going to grow. Now, with what's going on in the world today with America, even what the Prime Minister is speaking about, that he's fearful of shipping costs going up, which would be included in our taxation. Is that a fair assumption to make? But there's no productivity gains, there's no big pronouncements of anything that's going to significantly move the needle. I see that he stayed away from making pronouncements about hotel investors, because I didn't even hear BMAX. I didn't hear Galaxy. Where is Sabusha Hotel? What's happening with Point Seraphin Hotel? The major project that I see going on is Mont Piedmont, and that developer seems to be extremely serious about what he's doing and moving. But I know that he's also going to hit headwinds, because the cost of doing business in St. Lucia is going to impact the size of the property he wants. He cannot get water. Think of it on a construction site. He's concerned not only about the cost of electricity, but whether in fact Loose Lake is going to be able to meet that level of demand. And so when we talk about making investments in infrastructure in this country, the airport, the roads, the water, the electricity, the training of the staff persons, it's to facilitate growth. And if you don't make those investments, of which this government has not over the last 4 years and doesn't even seem to have a plan to do that, I would say to you that these are going to be significant constraints to growth. and we're going to be in serious problems.
Thank you.